My own daughter looked me in the eye on Christmas Day and said, "You've been a freeloader lately." In front of everyone, she forbade me from sitting at the table in my own home. That single moment cut deeper than any insult I had ever known. Because it didn't just strip away dignity, it shattered the bond I thought was unbreakable. And from that wound began a battle that would change everything. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I live in a clay house where the wind smells like dust and juniper, where mornings begin with heat rising off adobe like a slow breath. I built my days to be simple after Margaret died, rinse the blue mug she painted for me, bloom the coffee, spiral the pour until the kettle's last whisper, and carry the cup to the bench I set under the Vegas. Out front, ristras of red chiles hang like prayer beads. In winter, they click when the breeze picks up, a soft warning that the cold has edges. 6 months ago, my daughter and her husband arrived with the promise of 2 weeks. The word temporary landed like a friendly dog and then refused to leave the porch. Lena named the house our rancho for the camera the first night, laughing, hair caught in the ring light, the phrase sticking to the living room until it sounded true to everyone but me. Aiden carried in cases labeled LED, tripod, lav mics, PR. They staged my bookshelves to frame their shots, angled the couch to catch natural golden hour, and called the corner where I read the vibe nook. I called it what it always was, my chair. They live on the internet the way artists live by a window. Mornings begin with soft boxes warming the room to a false afternoon while emails ping on their laptops. They talk about deliverables the way linemen talk about amperage, precise, confident, slightly bored. The little boxes that arrive each day, face creams, artisanal salts, apricot-colored candles, stack along the hallway until every step sounds softer. My tools hang untouched on pegboard in the shed, each outline traced in marker, a habit from years of climbing poles and fixing lines when storms tore the state like paper. I do the work a house asks an old man to do. Clean the lint trap, haul salt to the softener, swap the furnace filter before it turns gray, reset the breaker that trips when both ring lights and the microwave insist on existing at once. When a hinge squeals, I oil it. When a board lifts on the deck, I set it back with 2 screws and a firm palm. I do these things quietly because quiet holds the place together. The guest list for Christmas floats to me in pieces I'm not meant to hear. A realtor, a brand rep, the HOA president from the development across Rodeo Road, people who would say stunning into their napkins. I check the mailbox and find a glossy postcard with a wreath printed in metallic ink. Inside the kitchen, pampas stems and marigolds crowd the sink. There's a smoked salt that smells like campfire and money. The ceramics Margaret and I saved for anniversaries are stacked on the counter, bright and exposed. I take one plate in my hands and set it down again as if I'd picked up a photograph by the face. "Dad, just relax," Aiden says, moving past me with a case of sparkling water. "Full house," Lena adds, a quick wave in the air that dusts me off the plan without looking at me long enough to see she's done it. I keep a pocket notebook with a short pencil clipped to the cover. It isn't for tallying what they spend. I don't belong to that math, but for the things the house tells me. Dust line on the baseboard needs a pass. Slow drip under the sink needs a new seal. The back gate leans. Shim it before the latch fails. If anyone reads it, they'll think it's a list. It's really the history of a man keeping a perimeter without raising a fence. At the fence, there is Mrs. Patel, 20 years my neighbor, gardener by obsession, and retired school principal by habit. We meet by the rosemary bush because it holds the sun longer. "You keep well, Mr. Moran," she says through her scarf. "Doing what I can," I answer, and we stand a minute, hearing a woodpecker try the telephone pole like a carpenter checking studs. She looks at the house and then at me, reading between lines the way principals do. She doesn't offer advice. She is kind enough not to. Night comes quick in the high desert. The ring light glow bleeds against the curtains while I rinse beans for pozole and set a pot to soak. Somewhere a script is being rehearsed. Southwest Christmas and the content that gives back. A simple, authentic table. The words make a kind of sense until they are held against the weight of the ceramic bowls Margaret threw with her own hands. Authentic has a different temperature when you can feel the thumbprint. I walk the rooms the way a man walks a fence line before dark. My fingers touch switches, frames, that blue mug. The mezcal a friend brought back from Oaxaca sits unopened on the shelf, still wearing its paper seal like a promise. I won't open it for strangers who clap for themselves between courses. In the garage, the chair I refinished last spring catches the light from the laundry room. I run a palm over the arm where the varnish lays like water. The house is an instrument. Lately it has been tuned to someone else's ear. There are words I could say. There are always words. I could ask why a realtor needs to eat my lamb on my plates, or why sponsorship has a seat at my table. But the man who bought the table needs to check with the seating chart. I could tell them the last time I used these dishes was Margaret's final birthday, and that I still dry them with the towel she embroidered because her stitches hold better than anything you buy now. Instead, I note the weight of the plate and put it back. I set the pozole to simmer and step onto the porch. The sky is that relentless New Mexico blue that goes black without passing through any lesser shade. Coyotes talk to each other in the arroyo. Wind pulls the smell of pinon smoke down the street. I think of the word temporary the way you think of a loose step, not dangerous until it is. I picture the Christmas table, the lens, the applause for being cozy. Then I picture the nails in the joists, the screws set flush, the breaker labels I wrote in block letters for the next person who might need to know. Boundaries, Caleb, I tell myself. There are things you can fix with a fresh seal and a steady hand, and there are things that require turning off the line. I go back in and wash my hands. The pozole blips once, like a small heart. Tomorrow can bring whatever script it wants. Tonight, the house is mine long enough to hear it breathe. By late morning, the house was ringing like a doorbell that wouldn't give up. Vans nose to the curb, tires whispering over dust, and men in logo jackets jogged up my path with boxes hugged to their chests. The first carton came cool to the touch, butcher paper damp with melt. When I opened it, trimmed lamb cuts lay in neat rows, each wrapped with twine and a tag that claimed heritage. Another box breathed out cold like a winter cellar, revealing cheeses under wax caps, labels letterpressed to look honest and old. Someone had chosen each texture for the camera, even the straw inside looked arranged. More deliveries followed, flowers the color of fire, marigolds, and something feathery that left gold dust on the counter when I set them down, then a sleeve of Palo Santo sticks sealed in cellophane that fogged with resin whenever I pressed it. I moved slowly, giving everything a place for now so my hands could learn what my mind already knew. None of it belonged to my way of living. The refrigerator, which used to exhale only milk and beans and leftover stew, now wore the perfume of a grocery catalog. Jars clinked as if practicing an argument. Aiden dropped an armload of linen beside the sink and called the effect elevated, a word that floated like helium and didn't lift much. On the island, Lena's tablet showed a list framed in a cheerful font. I didn't recognize the names, only the roles she'd typed in parentheses, a realtor with a trademark symbol after his team name, a brand partner she called our content angel, and an HOA president from 3 neighborhoods over, an address I knew only for its iron gates. The absence mattered more than the presence. No brothers, no cousins, none of the old friends who could unstick a chair and tell a story while their hands found the right drawer. Just strangers who would arrive hungry for the version of us presented to them. My phone chimed with the tone I used for the credit union, 2 withdrawals stacked on the lock screen, both larger than any single grocery run I had made since the year we paid off the house. One labeled catering deposit, one labeled content retainer. The little bar that shows available balance retreated by an inch. I stood with the phone in my palm and let the numbers cool there. There's a way money leaves a body that isn't always through a wallet. Sometimes it leaves through noise, through the insistence that celebration is a bill payable by whoever happens to be closest. I asked Aiden in the manner of a lineman checking a line. Simple, direct. What are these charges? Bridge money, he said, moving a stack of plates so a camera could see more tablecloth. Campaign pays out after New Year's, we'll reimburse. I didn't tell him that reimbursement is a promise most at home inside someone else's future. I'd learned a long time ago to mark sentences by how they age. His would spoil by January. I found Lena threading a florist's wire through marigolds, the petals making a quiet sound like hands applauding under a blanket. "How many seats?" I asked. "Full house," she said, not looking up, and twisted another wire into a neat bite. The anniversary ceramics had come down from the high shelf. Someone had scrubbed them with a cleaner too strong, lifting the soft glaze until the surface felt brighter than it should, like a voice raised in the wrong room. A tripod leaned over the table, its arms stretched above napkins fanned like a showgirl's deck. The plates were stacked, not to be used but to be seen. Margaret's thumbprint along one rim still showed where she had smoothed the slip and left herself behind. I placed my hand there. It was the only part of the table that felt human. Another tap of the bell, another haul. Between trips, the house grew thinner in the ways that mattered. The hold of wood on air, the rhythm of footsteps that knew where to fall. I stepped into the garage to let the cool, dry air find my face. Holiday bins, labeled in my handwriting, were pushed to a single wall as if they had done something wrong. In their place stood towers of rented Chiavari chairs, each tied with a return tag. Narrow folding tables leaned like stacked doors, and a folded cart listed the firm's name and a Monday pickup deadline. The plan had mass. It took up space. That was the point. Back inside, the tablet list had gained check marks. I moved it to wipe a ring of water and saw the pop-up that had arrived when I wasn't looking. "Thank you for your payment." The refrigerator hummed a little louder, burdened by aspiration. "Dad, you're overthinking," Aiden said, snipping a tag. "Just let the night be." "Trust me," Lena added, arranging a camera so the stems of the marigolds radiated. "The vibe needs to land." I have spent my life with things that either carry current or they don't. You don't argue a line into working. You trace it, you test, you shut the box when you hear the wrong sizzle. I opened the cupboard for my mug and found it moved 3 inches to the left, so the shelf would read as symmetrical. The blue glaze caught a square of afternoon. To Caleb, 40 years strong, Margaret had written in her careful hand a lifetime ago, the paint flared at the downstrokes. I held it and felt its temperature settle me. The house tuned itself in small ways you could miss unless you knew the chords. Door latch softer because the living room rug had been rolled for a shot. Front hall brighter because a bulb was replaced with one that lies about time of day. The pocket notebook in my back pocket made a square against my jeans. In it I wrote lamb arrived, tablet list not family, 2 hits on checking, ceramic scrubbed, chairs rented, return Monday. It looked like a list. It was a record. A fence line drawn in pencil because pen bleeds through. When I set the mug down, the sound was wrong, too light for ceramic on wood. I realized they'd taped foam pads to the underside of the table to keep the audio clean if a fork was dropped. The thoughtfulness would have been admirable if it had not ignored the life the table already contained. I peeled one circle of foam free and turned it between finger and thumb until it lost its stick. Somewhere, a timer chirped on cue for a shot. Outside wind worried the chilies on the wall and sent a faint pepper smell through the screen. I leaned against the island, let breath find depth, and practiced not answering all at once. A man can be a backdrop or a boundary depending on when he speaks. I've learned to hold until the right switch. The house had more people coming to it than usual and fewer who knew it. I rinsed my hands and dried them on a towel that still held a faded line of red thread from another Christmas, another kitchen. Expectations piled carefully around me, each box promising a better version of night. The tune was off. I could hear it in the hinges. Something would crack soon, plate, plan, or patience, and when it did, I meant to be steady enough to catch the sound. Evening settled over the desert like a lid, and the house put on the light it wears for company. Candles glowed along the adobe ledge, and a warm wash from the chandelier softened the edges of the room into something nearly generous. The soft boxes were tucked out of sight, but I could feel their absence like a camera still humming after the switch is off. Linen ran the length of Margaret's table, a calm river of cream with marigold islands anchored in glass. The flat-lay tripod hovered above the arrangement, arm cocked, waiting for a cue. I tested the air the way a man checks for current, not with fingers but with a learned caution behind the ribs. Strangers came dressed as friends, their voices pitched for a space with good echo. The realtor shook my hand with two of his fingers and a smile that reflected the chandelier back at itself. The brand partner carried a bottle with a ribbon the color of a new penny and complimented the authentic walls. The HOA man glanced at the Vegas like he was measuring them against a code book. They admired Ristras and the glazing on the plates as if those things had grown here overnight and were blooming for their benefit. Coats landed on my hall tree, shoes made careful arcs around my entry rug like dancers on tape marks. I took glasses down from the cabinet without looking, muscle memory reaching ahead of thought. The room was subtly foreign. My reading chair had been nudged against the far wall so a wide shot could breathe. The couch angled toward the hearth as if it had always preferred that lean. Someone had placed the corkscrew in the second drawer instead of the first because it photographed better beside the linen. I carried water from the sink to the table and set each glass in the place where the plates wanted them. People notice when a house works. They do not notice the hands that keep it working. Margaret's chandelier hummed the way old fixtures hum when the dimmer is set just under shore. I could hear it as I walked toward the head chair without thinking, the same way a body finds the groove of a well-used path. For 20 years, my shoulder has known the distance between kitchen and table, and my palm has known the cool of that carved top rail. I reached it and paused because habit pauses before sitting, like a bow to the duty in the wood. The red tally light winked somewhere in my periphery, a small cyclops waiting for the arc. Lena stepped in, palm light on the chair back, a smile already edited for future use. Her eyes did not match her mouth. She tilted her face to the room and pitched her voice to clear the linen. "Dad, take a side chair," she said, and the sentence wearing courtesy fit like a borrowed jacket. The diners tilted with the sound in that half-inch of hush that comes before people decide whether to listen. She adjusted a napkin fold for the camera and added the cut the way a seamstress adds thread. "You've been a freeloader lately." The word fell soft but landed hard. It was not shouted, not cruel in tone. It arrived as a label, a sticky tag pressed just above the heart. Aiden made a small sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. "We're carrying the hosting load now," he said, as if categories were being assigned for bookkeeping. Two guests froze mid-gesture. A glass hovered at the exact height where sound changes timbre. The chandelier hum narrowed to a tighter note and then held. I did not grab the chair back as if it were mine, though it was. I did not raise my voice over music that had been chosen because it did not ask anything of anyone. I noticed the tape holding a lav mic under the table edge and the thin foam dots pressed to the underside to soften dropped silver. I could smell Palo Santo under the more honest scent of roasted lamb and the nutty edge of fresh tortillas. The room had arranged itself for a story that did not include me except as set dressing. My hand rested on the carved rail until the wood remembered who had touched it first. A quiet question is a tool if you pick it up like one. "Who paid for tonight's power, heat, and food?" I asked, level, like a man calling out a reading from a meter. It was not a challenge, not even a line on the floor, only a number spoken into air that knew math when it heard it. The brand partner's gaze slipped to the marigolds. The realtor stirred the condensation circle with his bottle like a child drawing on a desk. The HOA man cleared his throat in that formal way men clear space when they want rules to appear. Silence in a room has color. This one went the pale gray of a winter sky just before snow that won't come. I watched eyes move to the mantel and then to the photographs along it. Decades of Margaret and me standing in front of houses we had kept alive by doing what needs doing when no one claps. People who had shaken my hand started recalibrating. They saw what it means to know where the corkscrew lives and to fix a wobble with a folded matchbook and to catch a glass with one finger without looking because you already know the fall line of that table. Aiden tried to hook the narrative back to the dock. "Dad's retired. We've got hosting handled," he said, palm open as if displaying competence. He extended a gesture toward a smaller side chair set slightly off axis like an understudy waiting for a cue. The offer had the shape of hospitality without its temperature. It asked me to occupy the frame's leftover space and call it a seat. I didn't move. Stillness has weight when a man earns it. I let the insult sit in the center of the tablecloth, as visible and undeniable as a utensil dropped where the foam pads couldn't help. The chandelier hummed, and the candles made their small theater of light around marigolds that did not care who owned the night. Lena adjusted the camera angle by a degree. The red light watched without blinking. Somewhere a phone vibrated against wood and then went quiet. My fingertips found the cool rim of the plate nearest my hand. There in the curve, a shallow ripple where Margaret's thumb had once smoothed the slip, a human correction to a circle that did not need it. The porcelain did not answer the word. It simply held its shape and the print and the memory that a table is for those who have carried it up 2 flights and down again, sanded it twice, and fed a family for years on its back. The truth is not loud. It is heavy. I stepped back half a pace and let the scene resume, the way a lineman steps back after a test and notes the gauge. I placed the exchange in the ledger I keep in my head, where time keeps appointments better than people. A line had been crossed and logged. I did not announce the conclusion I was drawing, because a conclusion speaks more clearly when the room is finished listening to itself. The pressure rose the way winter heat rises through ductwork, slow, certain, inevitable. When I looked up, the chandelier's filaments made little cages of gold around themselves, and I knew we were an argument away from a courtroom. I left the table the way a man leaves a live wire. Careful hand's breadth of air between skin and danger. The chandelier's hum thinned down the hall until it was only a memory of sound. The house cooled with each step. Under the faint sweetness of Palo Santo, the old adobe smelled like clay and water left in a bucket overnight. Laughter from the dining room traveled in low waves, small breakers that lost energy on the plaster and died before they reached me. I looked at my watch, wrote the time in my pocket notebook, and gave the moment a plain name. 2 words witnessed by a room that pretended not to hear. In the hall cabinet, I keep a zippered pouch meant for the kinds of days that begin like any other and don't end that way. I laid it on my desk and unzipped the mouth. The deed with the raised county seal came first. Then the property tax receipts with their honest arithmetic, the insurance declarations with the valuation that always strikes me as too generous for a place held together by habit and patched screens. I added the last 3 utility bills in my name. Paper is heavier than truth when it stacks up. I like the weight. A forgotten timer pulsed in the kitchen. On the island, Aiden's iPad lay face up and unlocked, a blue wheel counting down. I turned the brightness down out of courtesy to the battery and the nerves, and the calendar app bloomed like a mapped field. The first day of January wore a colored block: Go Live, Air Casa, Casita Soft Launch. There were sub-entries tucked like little knives beneath it: listing photos, pricing grid, host bio, elder tenant on site. I did not photograph the screen. This was my house, and I would not learn the habit of stealing from what belongs to me. I read it twice, then I wrote the words in my notebook exactly as they were written there. People forget how permanent pencil is. The family file box lived on the lowest shelf because gravity and age both prefer it that way. A month ago, Aiden handed me a manila envelope called Medical Directive and asked for my signature to make clinic visits easier. I had stalled the way you stall a truck by lifting the clutch too fast. Tonight, I was glad of the hesitation. Inside the box, I found a PDF printout labeled Durable Power of Attorney. Sample. The margins were wrong, the font stretched like it had been pulled across a too-wide table, and the line where a notary would place a seal wore only white. I held that page beside the legitimate directive form my lawyer had sent years back, and the differences made themselves known like a miswired circuit. No jurat, no notary stamp, no witness initials. The signature block placed 3/16 of an inch higher than any office worth its stapler would allow. I wrote the discrepancies on a sticky note and pressed it to the draft. Then I slid the good form back into my file and set the suspect copy on the desk like a warning label. I carried the phone to my bedroom because that's where the air is quiet enough to hear a banker breathe. The credit union's night staff answered on the 3rd ring, voice trained for calm. I stated my name, my number, my mother's town. I need a flag on my account, I said. Suspected elder financial exploitation, possible unauthorized use. The word sounded too big for the room and exactly the right size for the line. We set text alerts for any charges in categories labeled content, retainer, or catering, and froze any new authorized users added in the last 90 days. The rep read a confirmation code. I wrote it twice and said it once out loud. lodging it where memory knows to look when paper is not near. I sent a single text to Mrs. Patel. "If you have a minute this evening, could you stop by? I may need a witness." She replied with a time. There are people you can ask for a spice or a ladder, and there are people you can ask for steadiness. Sometimes they are the same neighbor. On my phone, I opened the doorbell app and rewound the day to watch boxes arrive in little sped-up jerks, Lena's arm lifting to frame the wreath, the moment when my own hand appeared at the edge to hold the door while a courier backed down the steps. I scrolled to the recording from the entry just before dinner. The microphone had caught the word that matters. It always does, for better or worse. In the settings, I enabled an option I had never needed: auto record when specific words are spoken. I typed 3, freeloader, deed, power of attorney, and whispered each one until a red dot winked awake. Back at the desk, I slipped the deed, tax receipts, insurance declarations, and the freshest utility bill into the pouch. Behind them, I layered a one-page print explaining the difference between a guest and a tenant in New Mexico when there is no lease and no rent paid. I added a clean spiral notepad and 2 pens because a pen will fail you when you most need a line to land straight. I closed the zipper, the teeth marrying with a small staccato finality that felt good in the hand. I washed my hands in the bathroom sink like a man finishing a job, not because my hands were dirty, but because ritual steals heat from foolishness. The face in the mirror has Margaret's steadiness around the eyes, her refusal to dress panic in theater. I straightened my collar and listened to laughter crest and break again in the dining room. A life can be measured by what you don't go back to. On my way past the back door, I stopped at the casita. The deadbolt turned and set with a neat mechanical click I could tell apart from the main house by tone alone. I checked the window latch with 2 fingers and a thumb, the grip I use on a wrench when the thread might strip if you bully it. I switched off a dimmer someone had pushed too high in the hall and felt the Adobe breathe a fraction easier. One circuit reclaimed. I put the pouch on the entry table where my hand would find it in the morning without rummaging. Then I opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote a single line large enough to read without my glasses. 9 a.m. They leave, 9:15 locks. The graphite shone a little under the hall light. I stood there long enough to feel my heart find an even pace, then returned to the doorway of the dining room and stopped just shy of the frame. The show could have the room. The morning would belong to me. Somewhere deep in the walls, a breaker settled into place, and the house sounded right for one clean beat. From the doorway, I let the room take my measure. The chandelier hummed at that almost right pitch, a choir of filaments just shy of certainty. Music rested low, a guitar line that knew how to stay out of the way. Palo Santo drifted up the vents and mixed with roasted lamb, cumin, and the faint metallic thread of polished flatware. I kept one hand in my pocket, thumb on the edge of my notebook, and waited for the evening to choose which version of itself it wanted to be. The HOA president rose with the careful dignity of a man used to microphones. He held his glass like a small certificate and offered a bland civic blessing about neighborhoods stewarding their gifts, about using property wisely, about community pride. The words skimmed the linen and never quite sank. He sat as if he had completed a minor procedure. Aidan felt the vacuum and slid into it. He spoke in the new religion, all breezy nouns without weight. Family-managed property, content-enabled experiences, underutilized spaces turned into community touchpoints. He tossed glances at the realtor and the brand partner, angling for that neat triangle of approval. His hands made shapes in the air, corralling potential into a pen the size of my dining room. The realtor leaned in a fraction. The brand partner smiled the way one smiles at a dessert described in too much detail. Plates moved hand to hand. As the roast made its circuit, Lena reasserted her mark on the map. With the same lifted palm she'd used earlier, she directed me toward a smaller chair, angled off axis, framed to be invisible in a wide shot. Her smile went to the lens, her eyes sent the stop sign. "Dad, the side chair works best," she said, and the microphone tape under the rim waited like a mouth. I didn't sit. Housekeeping has its own grammar, and I spoke it. I nudged a glass 2 millimeters to end a wobble. I aligned a knife so it wouldn't catch a cuff. That was my refusal. Quiet, physical, unarguable. Sensing a need to cement the performance, Aidan reached into a folio and withdrew a crisp photocopy. He presented it first to the realtor and the HOA man, a chain of custody gesture intended to lend the page gravitas. Then he laid it on the linen, centered, a counterfeit bill placed with ceremony. He announced it like a magician naming a card. "Quitclaim deed for the casita," he said. I let my fingertips sit on the paper's edge as if checking a board for warp. The margin was wrong by a working man's eye, left margin too slim, top margin hungry. The notary block was a white field where a seal should live. No witness initials. The registration number wore a costume that didn't resemble our county's numbering at all. I turned the page so the red tally light could see what wasn't there. Then I set the copy down, flat and visible. From the pouch, I drew the counterweight, the original deed with the raised seal that catches light like the skin of an apple. The property tax receipts, regular as rain. The insurance declarations naming me 3 times in 3 places with the exact legal description. The utility bills, each one a quiet ledger of electrons and gallons moving through pipes and wires I maintain. I said the parcel number, the book and page at the county clerk's office, the date my wife and I signed the closing documents when we were younger and winter felt less sharp. The realtor's interest cooled by a degree, appetite sliding into caution. The HOA man straightened and asked the kind of procedural question that proves he's still in his lane. "Recorded where?" he said. "County clerk," I answered, plain. "Book and page. I'll provide copies tomorrow." I did not look at Lena or Aiden when I spoke to the room. I inventoried instead. This is my home. There is no lease, no transfer, no notary. The word that had been laid on me earlier, freeloader, died quietly between porcelain and paper, outlived by heavier nouns that do not need adjectives. Eyes drifted off the table and into the older record, photographs along the mantel, Margaret's thumbprint in a cooling rim, the way I had reached for the right drawer without looking because I had put the drawer there in the first place. Authority migrated the way heat does in winter, away from show toward mass. I closed the pouch and set it by my hand like a tool you mean to use again. Then I gave the night its schedule. "You will pack tonight," I said. "At 9 o'clock in the morning, you leave." At 9:15, I changed the locks. The times were measurements, not threats. Anything left can be retrieved by appointment. Aiden's voice tried on a legal jacket and found the sleeves long. He repeated gift, misused tenant, brushed against words he'd heard in a podcast and hoped would perform for him here. I made a single correction and let it stand. Guest, not tenant. No consideration, no recordation. There wasn't anything else to say that paper could not say better. Lena appealed to optics and calendar. "You're ruining Christmas," she hissed, a whisper meant to travel only as far as the camera needed. "We have brand obligations." I slid the photocopy back across the linen with 2 fingers, a counterfeit returned to sender. "This doesn't spend," I said, and the sentence held the weight of a coin. A soft knock came from the entry. Through the arch I saw Mrs. Patel on the threshold, hands folded, around a small tin of cardamom cookies, coat zipped to the throat. She did not step into the room. She stood where neighbors stand when they mean to be present without becoming a crowd. Her presence widened the circle that would remember this evening in the same way a door cracked open. Changes how a room behaves. The playlist tried to reassert itself with a warmer song. Conversation attempted to restart but came out thin, breathy, all surface. I set my fingertips on the plate where Margaret's print lives and lifted them again, leaving nothing visible and everything decided. The chandelier kept humming like a well-made machine. I closed the pouch, the zipper's small teeth engaged one after another, a sentence written in metal. The court adjourned without a gavel, and the night finally understood what it had become. I didn't argue. I closed the pouch, let the zipper's teeth pronounce the sentence again, and stepped out of the frame like a stagehand who knows when the scene is over. The hallway took the heat out of me. Clay held its night cool. The air lost the performative sweetness of Palo Santo and went back to water and dust. I wrote a single line in my notebook, ultimatum issued, witnessed, and underlined the time, so later no one could pretend the numbers drifted. On the entry table, I set the pouch in the spot where my hand naturally lands when I reach for keys. Upstairs, I laid out tomorrow's clothes with a mechanic's care. Pressed slacks, the collared shirt that still holds a whisper of starch, the leather belt Margaret gave me for our 20th. On the desk printer, I ran a one-page sheet about guests versus tenants, the blank fact of no lease and no rent, and slid it behind the deed. The county clerk's office hours printed beneath in municipal gray, a quiet clock that would not move for anyone's feelings. Downstairs, I powered the soft boxes off at their switches, not the plugs, a small ritual of respect for current and a reminder of where control actually lives. The ring light shed its fake dusk. I straightened one frame along the hallway, the photo of Margaret at Ghost Ranch, hair blown back, grin half caught, and felt the house find a notch closer to level. At the kitchen island, Aiden's tablet still showed a timer's pale circle. I ignored it. I opened the doorbell camera app and scrubbed through the evening, arrivals, the entry exchange, the moment when Freeloader turned the room 1 degree colder. I backed the clips to a thumb drive and labeled it with a strip of tape and the date. Then I texted Mrs. Patel. "Thank you for stopping by. May I call if I need an extra pair of eyes tomorrow morning?" Her reply arrived with the steadiness of someone who means yes when she writes it. "You can." In the guest room, laughter broke into pockets that didn't hold. The playlist tried to stitch them. The stitches showed. I didn't push the moment 1 inch further. Discipline, not kerosene. I poured water into the coffee machine's reservoir and measured out grounds for a 7:30 brew. At the casita threshold, I turned the deadbolt and checked window latches with the careful pressure you use when threads are near their limit. I pocketed the spare keys, moved them to a small tin on my dresser, and left the hook empty as a visible decision. I sat in the bedroom chair by the window and refused speeches. My mind offered half a dozen, the kind that bloom under adrenaline and wilt under daylight. I set them aside like dull tools. I let the quiet reassert its claim. On the desk, I wrote a memo to myself, date stamped and signed, the names present, the photocopies defects, the exact wording of my deadline. It looked officious for a house note. That was the point. Tomorrow, truth would need as few adjectives as possible. By 10, the house began to shrug the party off. Doors sighed, coats slid on, tires whispered loose gravel. Headlights threw white shapes across the stucco and then strained away toward Rodeo Road. I watched without moving the curtain. A man doesn't need a curtain between himself and what he already knows. The door closed on a last apology no one meant, and the night came back to me like a tool put in my palm. I walked the final circuit. Stove off, candles drowned, the thermostat set to hold. Boots lined themselves beside the dresser. When I lay down, sleep came the way it used to in storm seasons, light and coiled, ready to stand if wind took down a span. I woke at 7:45 without the clock. Morning scraped frost from the edge of the window and gave the yard a pale sheen. I showered and dressed in the clothes I had set out, knotted the resolve all the way through the belt Margaret had chosen with her small, certain hands. Coffee bloomed dark in the kitchen. The mug with her lettering warmed my thumb. The house felt larger by a fraction, like a chest that had finally exhaled. On the table, I placed the pouch and a clean notepad. I set a small tray with an envelope labeled keys and printed one line on an index card. Remaining items by appointment. I checked the phone's trigger settings for the words I'd chosen last night. The waveform jumped when I whispered them. The doorbell showed green. The thumb drive felt square in my pocket, a little fact you could touch. At 8:50, Aiden padded in wearing practice casual. He put a hand on the back of a chair as if it were his. "Holidays get heated, let's reset," he said. I pointed at the clock. 9 o'clock. He tried a grin that deserved an audience. The house didn't provide one. He drifted toward the hall with an airy promise to chat later. Lena followed with eyes swollen from sleep or staging. She asked for more time, fluttered words like deliverables and calendar. "We'll need the space," I said. "Pack essentials now. Schedule later for the rest." She searched for a softer surface and found the tray with the envelope instead. I kept my voice level so the walls could carry it without echo. I did not litigate respect or holidays. I did not run inventory on my grief or theirs. I pointed once at the pouch, once at the door. When they invoked brand obligations, I lifted the thumb drive slightly, a small square of stored memory. "Record is clear," I said, and set it back in the pocket where it belonged. At 8:58, I called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher sounded like morning coffee and training. I asked for a civil standby at 9 for removal of unauthorized guests. I spoke my parcel number, my name, my address. She read a dispatch reference number. I wrote it beside my note about locks. When I thanked her, I meant it. I stood where the hallway opens to kitchen and entry, a place from which I could see the guest room door and the driveway in one sweep. The house gathered itself, walls and wires and the air between. I set my mug down and listened to its soft ceramic click. The minute hand touched the mark. Somewhere a phone chimed from a suitcase. The line to dispatch still rang in my head, steady as a tone. 9 o'clock arrived like a switch. You don't push it, you recognize it, and I prepared to do the next thing on the list. 9 o'clock landed like a level on a board, bubble-centered, decision true. I stood where the hallway opens to kitchen and entry, the pouch on the table, the tray labeled keys beside it, my coffee cooling to a brown ring. The heater made its low, even rush through the vents. Outside, tires whispered along the cul-de-sac and went quiet. The doorbell camera showed green. 2 officers came into frame a minute later, blue and khaki against the winter light. I opened the door before they had to knock. The older one, name tag Romero, had the practiced calm of men who have seen evenings like mine wear the next morning's face. His partner's eyes moved like a new lineman's, checking anchors, keeping count. Romero took off his sunglasses, let the house see his eyes. "Morning, sir," he said. "You requested a civil standby?" "Yes," I answered. "Well, removal of unauthorized guests." "No lease, no rent, deadline given last night. I'd appreciate your presence to keep the peace." We stepped inside. The younger officer stood by the entry, hands visible, scanning the room without touching anything. I unzipped the pouch on the kitchen table. Paper has its own ceremony when it matters. The original deed with the raised seal that catches light, property tax receipts stacked by year, insurance declarations naming me across 3 lines, the latest utility bills, a ledger of electrons and gallons paid by my account. I placed a 1-page print titled Guests Versus. Tenants beneath them. No lease, no rent, no tenancy. My voice stayed level. I inventoried rather than accused. Before Romero replied, Lena's phone chirped from the hall like a bird let into a room by accident. She slipped past us with the controlled disarray people use when they want chaos to look like wind. In less than a minute, my cell buzzed in my pocket with a blocked number and a gentle voice. Adult Protective Services doing a welfare check after a report of elder agitation. I thanked the caller, said I had requested a civil standby myself, stated that I was safe and calm, and gave Romero a nod to acknowledge the timing. Optics came dressed as concern. I let them pass through the doorway without taking off their shoes. Aiden arrived with a folio under his arm as if paperwork could make a better entrance than a person. He laid the photocopy quitclaim on the table, then a packet he called a medical directive. I set the copy flat and let the room look at the absence. No notary seal, no jurat, witness lines blank, margins wrong, a registration number not born in our county. I placed beside it the template my lawyer had provided years ago for a legitimate directive. With its heavy jurat, its notary stamp, its tidy architecture. I didn't need to tell Romero what was missing. He saw it and made a brief note. "Let's confirm the account side," I said, and hit speaker for the credit union. The rep read back last night's flags, alerts on merchant codes related to content, retainer, catering, freeze on newly added authorized users, confirmation code 5 digits long. I wrote it in the notebook while the officers watched the smallness of due process do its work. The door eased open and Mrs. Patel stepped inside the entry with a tin of cardamom cookies held like a polite passport. She stayed near the threshold. "If an officer requires it," she said quietly. My doorbell captured last night's comments at the entry and the seating exchange. She glanced at Romero, not at me. He thanked her, took the timestamp she'd written on a note, and said he would reference it in his report. She didn't look for approval. She had already done the right thing, and now she was on her porch again. A fence still between us, which is how neighbors keep their kindness from turning into spectacle. Romero returned his attention to me. He spoke clearly, almost kindly, the way a man holds a ladder while explaining how to descend. "This is a civil matter. Without a lease, you may ask guests to leave. We're here to keep everyone safe while that happens. Any dispute over alleged transfers or powers of attorney belongs in court, not today's doorway." I nodded. "They have 60 minutes for essentials, remainder by scheduled appointment." My finger touched the index card that said as much. Keys on the tray. Packing began with the sound of zippers deciding to be stubborn. Drawers opened, paused, shut. The guest room exhaled a smell of travel-sized shampoos and an iron's first hot breath. I stayed where I could see the driveway and the hall at once. The phone in my pocket listened for the 3 words I'd told it to notice, the way a dog pricks at a certain whistle. A neighbor's curtain lifted and set, a dog gave 2 professional barks and retired. A sedan slid by and slowed, as if reading the situation would make it smaller. My hand found the belt Margaret had given me, leather gone supple where work makes it bend. Relief moved in the same lane as grief, slow, careful, not in a hurry to pass. I let both exist. The house met my breathing and matched it until we were keeping time again. Keys arrived with more theater than metal requires. Aiden placed 2 fobs on the tray like dropping chips at a bad table. He didn't look at me. Lena stood at the threshold with a last ask for more time, eyes raw and calculating. Romero answered it for me by repeating the guidance he had already given. Essentials now, remainder by appointment. I kept the word appointment in my mouth long enough for it to anchor. On the porch rail, I set Aiden's smartband found on the coffee table after he'd made 3 trips and forgotten the wrist that wore it. Boundary, not malice. We did the paperwork with the quiet of men writing down a model number. Romero offered the incident number. I wrote it beside his name and the time, then underlined once. He explained next steps if trouble found its way back. Trespass notice, restraining order, without making a promise the law couldn't keep. Boxes found the back seat, then the trunk. Suitcases thumped, latches clicked, a sound like certainty folded and zipped. The engine turned, caught, and idled with the high, nervous pitch of a car weighted wrong. They backed down the drive, taillights sliding a band of red across the stucco like paint on water. At the curb, the car hesitated as if a different decision might still be for sale. Then it turned toward Rodeo Road and the morning took it. The officers gave me a nod that wasn't victory and wasn't condolence. It was the nod of a job done without romance. I thanked them. The heater cycled off and the house listened to itself. In the kitchen, the coffee had left its faint halo on the table. I pressed my thumb to it, wiped a crescent clean, and felt the lightness search for its final resting place. The ordinary music of home rose where noise had been, and I let it play. When the taillights vanished at the bend, the house stood still as a paused breath. I read the incident number once more, closed the notebook, and let my hands find work. Tools set the grammar for the day, new deadbolts, strike plates, 3-inch screws for the jams, a tube of graphite, the cordless driver with a full battery. I laid everything on the hall table like instruments before a song. The main door came first. I backed the old screws out, held the cylinder in my palm long enough to feel its history, then seated the new lock with the satisfied click of threads catching clean. I recorded the serial tag and the time. Side door next, then the casita, where the deadbolt turned like a truth that didn't need witness. The old cylinders went into a zip bag I labeled with a black marker and today's date. Boundaries bagged and archived. Digital locks were next. I powered Lena's camera down and ejected the SD card labeled XMAS-D INNER-A. I copied the file tree onto my own drive, an evidence folder named with timestamps, then returned the card, not as property, but as a placeholder for the scene it failed to own. I opened the router page, reset the network name to something plain, Moran_house, and wrote a new key in block letters in my notebook. Guest access off. Smart home sharing revoked from their emails. The phone chimed as devices tried and failed to rejoin. Silence followed, clean and square. I called Hal, who answers before the 3rd ring and leaves air for hard things. I described the photocopy quitclaim with its hungry margins, the almost power of attorney, the APS call, and the civil standby. He hummed once, a lawyer's low current. He advised a cease and desist barring any commercial use of the home's imagery, a preservation notice for any forged document they might circulate, and a no trespass letter to hold in reserve. Send me scans of the deed, insurance declarations, and utilities, he said, and the doorbell timestamps. I scanned and emailed while we were still on the line. He promised templates by afternoon, not as threat, but as guardrails. We hung up with the old-fashioned weight of 2 people agreeing on the next necessary step. Paper has a way of making air behave. I drafted a one-page house guest policy on plain white. Time limits, contribution expectations, rooms off limits, the casita unless invited, key control, the appointment-only rule for belongings, and remedies if terms are broken. I signed and dated the bottom, three-holed the page, and slid it into a slim binder labeled House Rules. It went on the shelf beside the deed. Not spectacle, not a manifesto, just a spine for the place to lean on. Meaning returned to objects when I lifted them with both hands. I laid a clean towel on the counter and brought Margaret's ceramics down one by one, checked each rim for the faint ripple where her thumb corrected the circle, then carried them back to the high shelf with cotton between plates so they would not sing against each other by accident. I peeled the foam dots from the table's underside and felt the wood go honest again. Cables coiled. Linens folded. The mezcal bottle, still sealed, reclaimed its small square of quiet on the shelf. Sun warmed the glaze on one bowl and made a shallow lake of light. I let it stay. Across the street, Marisol answered my text with a thumbs up and the kind of neighborly speed that means you've lent each other salt and sympathy before. Her teenage son and his friend showed up with winter breath and good manners. We ferried rented Chiavari chairs from living room to garage to the truck in a rhythm easy enough to talk through if we wanted to, but we didn't. I paid them in cash, poured water into their bottles, and tore a receipt from my notepad with 2 clean strokes. Work is also a way to say thank you without making anyone stand still for it. Mrs. Patel tapped on the frame and stepped into the entry with a label maker and a stack of unused boxes. We packed 2 cartons of Lena's non-essentials, ring lights, napkin rings, props named for holidays, and printed labels with the quiet pleasure of order returning to a room. She asked nothing. I told her only what a neighbor needs to know, that the morning had ended without yelling, that a process had held. Respect is a fence that keeps privacy from turning into loneliness. Small chores stitched the afternoon together. I called the insurer and added a rider excluding short-term rentals. The agent read back the new language, and I wrote the policy number beside it. I reset the bank alerts to daily summaries, not the frantic pings of last night. I placed a mail hold for any package addressed to Lena or Aiden, pick up by appointment only. I drafted a neutral note to the HOA clarifying that no short-term rental would occur at my address and copied myself for the file. None of this required anger. It required a pen, a phone, and not losing your place on the page. I texted Lena a single sentence and stopped there. When you're ready to talk like adults, no cameras, no sponsors, I'm here. Everything else is by appointment. The phone stayed face down after I hit send. A father can leave a light on without leaving the door unlatched. Light shifted across the floorboards, and the house asked for smaller comforts. I brewed fresh coffee and raised 2 windows just long enough to let December air sweep the Palo Santo out, then closed them to keep the heat where it serves. I watered the yucca until the soil darkened evenly, then oiled the front door hinges until their sigh became a whisper. The corkscrew returned to the first drawer, where it belongs when you want a night to stay simple. Dusk took the edges off adobe and returned it to warm clay. I changed the doorbell chime to a softer tone and watched the test button blink like a heartbeat that didn't hurry. In the reading chair, I sat with the mezcal still unopened, and the binder of house rules slid into the pouch behind the deed. The zipper's click wrote a period at the end of the day. Quiet arrived not as a prize, but as the baseline a home hums when no one is trying to turn it into a stage. I listened to that ordinary music and recognized it, the way you recognize your own handwriting after too long reading other people's notes. Morning came without fanfare. A clear band of light pressed across the bedroom wall like a level showing true. I woke before the radio's hour and let the quiet settle around me, not as an emptiness, but as the ordinary noise of a house that has no performance scheduled. The heater clicked once, sighed through the vents, and rested. Somewhere a neighbor's car eased out of a driveway and went respectful on the throttle. I stood, slid my feet into the slippers I always miss in summer, and walked the familiar path to the kitchen. The pour-over routine is less a recipe than a prayer. Rinse the blue mug with Margaret's lettering so the clay wakes. Grind just enough beans to sound like gravel under a slow stream. Bloom, spiral, wait. When the steam rose, it smelled like earth that had been honest with itself. I set the mug on the table and the ceramic made that clean tick I've always trusted. Sun came in low, unfiltered by ring lights, and found the dust I meant to sweep later. I turned the radio to the classical station Margaret loved. A cello moved through air like a large animal choosing not to hurry. It lifted nothing dramatic, just the weight of a room that had held too much air the night before. The inbox held confirmations that felt like small screws seating from Hal. 2 attachments, cease and desist and preservation notice, crisp and unadorned. From the HOA, acknowledgement that short-term rentals are not permitted at my parcel, plus a thank you for the clarification. From the credit union, a daily summary with nothing new or hungry in it. I printed the letters, 3-holed them, and slid them behind the House Rules binder tab. The incident number from yesterday's standby I wrote again in the margin, not because I might forget, but because cross-references make a spine stronger. I stepped out to the wall cap with a note for Mrs. Patel and found a small bag of citrus already waiting. 2 oranges, a lemon with a leaf still attached. She was in her yard checking the rosemary for frost, hat pulled low. "Looks calmer," she said. "It is," I answered and raised the bag so she could see I had gotten the message. I tucked a thank you card under the twine for her to find next time she passed the wall. We didn't stand there and chew the same story into rags. Neighbors who know the shape of silence are worth more than any policy. Back inside, I made a list the way I used to after storms, when the lines were down and the day would only behave if you gave it tasks. Call the roofer about the western eave, wind has been chewing at it. Recalk the kitchen window, schedule furnace service, sweep the casita porch, and check the drain by the steps. Confirm the rental firm picked up the last stack of chairs. Note to drop the linens by noon. I printed the list in pencil, a ledger of small weights I could lift without pride. A padded envelope sat on the counter with Aiden's smart band and a polite label. I set it in the porch lockbox and sent 1 sentence to a shared email. Pickup window available by appointment, link attached. Boundary wrapped in courtesy. That balance felt right in my hands. I let myself think the word father without trying to flex it into a heroic pose. It did not mean financier or prop. It meant adult among adults, keeper of a house I've already paid for, the man who chooses process when volume would be cheaper in the moment and ruinous in the long term. Grief walked through like a quiet inspector, pointed at a couple of beams and nodded. Relief sat down at the table and put its weight where the wood could take it. Neither stayed long enough to become a speech. I drafted a short letter to Lena and left it unsent. No cameras, shared costs, respect for rooms, time-bound stays, acknowledgement of the harm. 10 lines, each line a plank across water. I filed it behind house rules, not as leverage, but as proof to myself that the door in my mind was not deadbolted, only properly latched. My phone buzzed with a photo from Marisol's boys. The chiavari stacks loaded on a truck bed, the rental shop's sign caught by accident in the corner. I thanked them, sent a small bonus, and drew a line through the task on my list that felt better than most lines a man draws in a day. I swept the kitchen, not because anyone would see it, but because crumbs make their own arguments if you let them. 1 hinge on the hallway closet had a dry sigh. A drop of oil returned it to the register it prefers. I aligned the corkscrew in the first drawer again, a small promise kept twice to remind myself that attention is a habit, not a mood. The yucca took a second drink because the sun had found it early and asked for more. Midday laid itself over the house like a warm blanket, and I opened a window just long enough to let cold air correct the room. Margaret's plates held a shallow lake of light on their high shelf. The mezcal remained unopened, not out of penance, but because sufficiency doesn't require a toast. I answered 1 more email from Hal. The templates were filed. The preservation notice ready to send if needed, and shut the laptop on a day that no longer needed a screen to exist. In the afternoon, I stepped onto the porch with my mug and tasted the air. Adobe held the sun the way a palm holds a coin you don't plan to spend. A dog barked twice down the block. Somewhere a hammer took 3 neat swings and stopped. Someone else was setting their own line straight. I stood there and let the neighborhood be itself around me, a collection of minor sounds that together say, home. Inside, I closed the pouch that holds the deed and the house rules. The zipper made the same sentence it made yesterday and the day before, a sentence that doesn't brag, only ends what needs ending. The house hummed at its baseline again, the refrigerator's even breath, the radio now on a piano that didn't try to prove anything, the quiet tick of the heater deciding to rest. I set the blue mug down and heard the honest ceramic answer. Victory didn't feel like a fanfare. It felt like steadiness left standing, and that was enough. By late afternoon, the light went long and thin, laying gold across the floorboards and turning the clay house into a held breath. I sat at the table with my notebook open to an empty page and let the room tell me what to write. The radio barely murmured. A piano kept honest time. The day had been all small repairs and confirmations, the kind of work that leaves no applause, only a steadier surface under your hands. I looked at the blank and thought, this is where I decide what all of it means. Kindness came first. I wrote the word and drew a box around it, then another box outside the first. You can fill the inner box until it looks like love, but if you never draw the outer one, someone will treat your road like a private shortcut. 30 years on the line taught me that current needs a rated load and a breaker. Kindness without a breaker is flattery toward disaster. So I married the word to a rule. Generosity that does not respect limits stops being generous and starts being subsidy. I underlined the sentence once, hard enough to feel the pencil bite. Then I wrote paper beats volume. The house had shown me that truth does not persuade by shouting. It arrives in raised seals, parcel numbers, receipts, timestamps, and a zipper's click. Evidence is a quiet voice that outlives theater. I thought of the photocopy with hungry margins and the way the red tally light saw its absence. I thought of the deed's weight and how air changes around a document that knows its own authority. When my breath tried to rehearse a retort I didn't say last night, I let the paper answer for me again. The word father felt different in my mouth than it used to. I am not a wallet. I am not a stage prop. I am not a permanent rescue boat launched every time someone confuses aspiration with entitlement. Father at my age means adult among adults, a man with a home and rules who is available to relationship under mutual terms. That definition holds grief for a fantasy family that did not exist and makes room for relief that the house I do have can breathe. There's no heroics in that sentence. There's discipline and patience and the kind of courage that looks like showing your work. To keep myself honest, I wrote the twist I didn't want to write. I waited too long to draw the outer box. I let the word temporary sprawl into a season because I preferred quiet to confrontation. I believed time would nudge them toward responsibility, and time took my belief and spent it. Owning that line kept righteousness from hardening into self-pity. If there's a next time with anyone, the rules go up on day 1, not day 100. Community isn't a crowd. It's a scaffold you notice only when it holds. Mrs. Patel stood in a doorway and widened the circle of witness without making a show of it. Marisol's boys did the work and took their pay with the easy pride teenagers should feel. Hal answered his phone and put words into order so consequence would stand up in daylight. I gave credit where it belonged and then gave some to myself. I turned confusion into lists, heat into steps, insult into documentation. Self-respect is not loud. It is maintenance. I sketched a plan for living forward that looked like a week instead of a saga. Furnace service on Thursday. Roofer next clear morning. Library thrift shift on Tuesday. I can still sort a box like a man who knows the value of things other people forget. Maybe 12th night I'll host a small supper for neighbors who bring themselves, not a brand. The casita will stay a guest space for family under the new policy, or for a veteran in transition if the church needs a bed offered. A house should shelter courage as well as comfort. At the top of the page I printed, "House is a verb." Under it I wrote a creed that fit on one palm. Evidence, amendments, boundaries, appointments, courtesy. I tore the page cleanly, slid it behind the house rules binder, and felt the alignment between personal ethic and household policy click into place like a latch catching. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena, a request for a pickup slot for one small box. It landed without spin, just a line and a period. I sent the scheduling link and added one sentence I've promised myself to keep unchanged. I'm here when you're ready to talk. No cameras. The message went out like a rope thrown across water. Not a tug, not a test, only a measurable distance that can be crossed by someone who decides to swim. Evening came in layers. I set a single candle by Margaret's photo and let it burn without speech. The mezcal stayed sealed because sufficiency does not need a toast. I shut off the last light and stood in the dark long enough to hear the house at baseline. Refrigerator even, heater deciding, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of things working. I understood the message then as a practice, not a frameable moral. It will need repeating in small ways. Label the keys, write the rule, send the appointment link, keep the promise, oil the hinge. Before bed, I walked a last circuit. Bolt set, window clicked, binder shelved. On the porch, the lockbox felt cool in my hand. Inside, the padded envelope waited for a name to appear on the calendar. I tasted the desert cold and felt the slight ache that comes when you let go of a future that was only ever a performance. Behind that ache was something truer, a steadiness with a center of gravity all its own. Fences, not walls, I wrote on the notebook margin before closing it. Then I went to sleep in a house that hummed like a well-built line under a clear sky, and that was enough. Some stories don't end with confetti. They end with a quiet room finally breathing at its own pace. In that stillness, a simple truth comes into focus. Kindness without boundaries is not love. It's leakage. Generosity needs structure the way current needs a breaker. Without limits, the circuit overheats and the house goes dark. The real work of repair begins when lines are drawn not to keep people out, but to keep dignity in. We learn that proof outlasts performance. Paper is humble, dates, receipts, signatures, incident numbers, yet it carries a gravity no raised voice can match. Evidence is the quiet voice that endures after the crowd goes home. And when emotion begs to be the judge, process steps forward like a steady hand on a ladder, showing how to come down without a fall. That is how a life gets retuned. Not by speeches, but by the zipper of a document pouch, the click of a new deadbolt, the simple courtesy of an appointment kept. Home, too, is more verb than noun. It isn't the square footage, the finishes, or the staged glow of borrowed lights. It's the honest music of ordinary things doing their job. A hinge that no longer complains, a kettle that whispers at the right moment, a chair returned to its rightful angle. When a place is tended with patience, it gives back a kind of quiet that does not need to be defended. It simply stands. And in that standing, forgiveness can exist alongside accountability. One door in the heart may stay unlocked, even while the lock on the porch is new and firm. There is no shame in recalibrating what respect looks like. To say appointments only is not coldness. It is adult life set to a rhythm that protects what matters. To say no cameras is not secrecy. It is a vote for presence. To say shared costs is not pettiness. It is how trust learns to balance its books. None of these are walls. They are fences, transparent, walkable, and placed where care can thrive without confusion. Community helps in ways that never make headlines. A neighbor who stands in the doorway as a witness, a friend who answers a late call with clear steps, young hands that lift the chairs back into the truck. These are the unphotographed scaffolds that keep a life from sagging. Strength is not a solo performance. It's an orchestra of small, dependable notes played on time. In the end, victory is rarely loud. It is the steadiness left standing after theatrics fade. Rules written down, accounts squared, rooms aired out, and a heartbeat that no longer hurries. From there, the path forward becomes practical. Fix what creaks, honor what's real, invite what's respectful, and let the rest find its way to the curb. If reconciliation arrives with honesty and a plan, welcome it. If not, live well anyway. The lesson holds either way. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If a line resonated or challenged you, tell us which one and why. Share what boundaries look like in your world and how you've learned to protect kindness without hardening your heart. We read every comment, and your voice is what turns a single tale into common ground. If you found value here, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter in this community's journey. Now it's your turn. Leave a thought, a lesson, or even a time-stamped moment that stayed with you. Until then, may your home hum at its own honest baseline, and may your fences be just high enough to keep the good in.